What happens when the president says, "This is an emergency"? And Congress responds with, "No, it's not." This week, Washington entered dangerous territory. Behind closed doors, the White House quietly invoked a set of emergency authorities, powers normally reserved for wars, natural disasters, or national collapse. Within hours, lawmakers from both parties began pushing back, warning that the move could stretch executive power beyond its legal breaking point. No tanks in the streets. No breaking news banner screaming, "Crisis." But make no mistake, this is one of the most serious power struggles between the White House and Congress in years. Tonight, we're breaking down what emergency measures were invoked, why Congress is furious, how this could reshape presidential power, and what it means for American democracy going forward. Because this isn't just about one administration, it's about who really controls the government when fear, urgency, and power collide. If you care about the Constitution, the balance of power, or how easily emergency can become the new normal, stay with me.
Section 1. What exactly did the White House do? Let's start with the basics, because this story is already being spun in every direction. Earlier this week, senior administration officials confirmed that the White House authorized emergency measures under existing federal statutes. While the language used publicly was careful, internally these powers allow the executive branch to redirect federal funds without standard congressional approval, fast-track regulations by bypassing lengthy review processes, expand federal enforcement authority in targeted areas, override certain statutory limits under urgent national interest. Now, this wasn't announced with a dramatic presidential address. No primetime speech. No flashing emergency alert. Instead, it happened the modern Washington way, through legal memos, agency directives, and quiet confirmations to reporters. The White House insists these actions are temporary, lawful, and necessary. An administration spokesperson described the situation like this: "We are facing an evolving national challenge that requires immediate action. These measures are fully authorized by law and will remain in place only as long as absolutely necessary." But here's the problem. The word emergency in American law is both powerful and dangerously flexible. Section 2. The history of emergency powers. To understand why Congress reacted so aggressively, you have to understand how emergency powers work in the United States. Under federal law, the president can unlock over 130 special powers simply by declaring a national emergency. These powers were created for wars, terrorist attacks, massive natural disasters, severe economic collapse. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Many emergencies in U.S. history didn't end when the crisis did. Some are still active decades later. As of today, the United States has dozens of ongoing national emergencies, some declared by presidents long gone, renewed year after year with barely any debate. And every time a new emergency is declared, it sets a precedent. Congress remembers this. Legal scholars remember this, and lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are increasingly uneasy with how normalized emergency governance has become. So when the White House invoked emergency authority this time, alarm bells went off instantly. Section 3. Congress fires back. The response from Capitol Hill was fast, and unusually bipartisan. Within hours, senior lawmakers demanded classified briefings. Committee chairs threatened subpoenas. Draft legislation to block the emergency measures began circulating. One Republican lawmaker put it bluntly: "An emergency does not mean a blank check for the executive branch." A Democratic senator echoed the concern. "We can't keep governing by crisis declaration. That's not how the Constitution works." This wasn't performative outrage. This was institutional fear. Members of Congress understand something the public rarely sees. Once power shifts to the executive branch, it almost never fully comes back. Lawmakers worry this move weakens congressional authority, bypasses democratic accountability, normalizes rule by executive decree, and perhaps most concerning, that it conditions Americans to accept extraordinary government powers as routine. Section 4. Why the White House says it had no choice. To be fair, the White House has its own argument, and it's not without merit. According to administration officials, Congress had months to act and failed. Proposed legislation stalled. Negotiations collapsed. Political gridlock paralyzed action. From the executive perspective,
waiting wasn't an option. A senior official speaking anonymously said, "When Congress can't act and the situation continues to worsen, the president has a responsibility to step in." This argument resonates with many Americans who are exhausted by dysfunction in Washington. To them, emergency action doesn't feel like tyranny, it feels like leadership. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous. Because once the public starts rewarding presidents for bypassing Congress, the incentive structure of democracy shifts. Section 5, the constitutional danger zone. Here's the core issue legal experts are debating right now. Who decides what counts as an emergency? Under current law, the answer is simple and troubling. The president does. Courts are traditionally reluctant to intervene unless powers are abused in extreme ways. Congress technically has the authority to terminate emergencies, but doing so requires political courage and consensus that rarely materialize. This creates a system where the executive declares emergencies, Congress complains, the public moves on, and the powers remain. Over time, that balance erodes. Former constitutional scholars warn that democracy doesn't usually collapse in a single dramatic moment, it erodes gradually, normalized by necessity. And every emergency declaration pushes that line a little further. Section 6. What happens next? Here are the realistic scenarios moving forward. Scenario 1, Congress backs down. Political pressure fades. Emergency powers remain in place. Precedent expands. Scenario 2, legislative showdown. Congress passes a resolution to limit or terminate the emergency. Veto threats follow. Court challenges begin. Scenario 3, judicial intervention. Federal courts step in, but only after months or years of litigation. By then, the emergency powers may have already reshaped policy. No outcome is clean. No outcome is painless. But one thing is certain. This fight is bigger than this administration. Future presidents, of both parties, are watching closely. Section 7, the media's quiet role in emergency power. One of the most overlooked parts of this story isn't happening in Congress, or even the White House. It's happening in the media. Notice how this unfolded. No urgent cheer-ins. No non-stop coverage. No countdown clocks. Instead, the story appeared in fragments, buried paragraphs, carefully worded headlines. And that matters, because emergency powers don't just rely on legal authority, they rely on public attention, or the lack of it. Historically, the most controversial expansions of executive power didn't happen during moments of mass panic. They happened when the public was distracted, exhausted, or overwhelmed. When emergencies feel abstract, when consequences feel distant, when urgency is framed as temporary. Media silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. It often means something structural is happening, and by the time it becomes visible, the system has already adjusted. Section 8. Why this sets a global precedent. This isn't just an American issue. The United States sets a global standard, especially when it comes to democratic norms. When U.S. presidents expand emergency authority, other governments notice. Other leaders learn. Other systems adapt. Around the world, emergency governance has become a familiar pattern. Declare urgency, centralize power, delay accountability, normalize the exception. What makes the U.S. different, at least historically, is institutional resistance. Congress, courts, civil society. But when those institutions hesitate, or fragment, the message sent globally is subtle but powerful. If it's acceptable here, it's acceptable anywhere. This moment will be studied, cited, referenced, not tomorrow, but years from now, when another leader invokes another emergency, under another justification. Section 9, the real-world consequences you don't see yet. Emergency powers don't usually feel dangerous at first. They feel efficient, decisive, clean. But over time, their effects compound. Agencies begin operating under relaxed constraints. Oversight weakens. Temporary measures become operational norms. Policies implemented under emergency authority are harder to reverse, even after the emergency ends. Why? Because systems adapt, budgets realign, incentives shift, and when the next crisis arrives, the threshold for declaring an emergency is already lower. This isn't speculation. It's pattern recognition. Every expanded power today becomes the baseline tomorrow. Section 10, the question history will ask. Years from now, historians won't ask, was the president well-intentioned? They'll ask, did the system hold? They'll look at moments like this, not dramatic collapses, but quiet decisions. Legal choices, procedural shortcuts, institutional hesitations. Democracies don't usually fall to coups. They erode through consent, through exhaustion, through normalization. And that's why this moment matters. Not because of who's in office, but because of what we allow to become routine. Emergencies end, powers rarely do. And whether this becomes a footnote, or a turning point, depends on what happens next.